Okay, does everybody remember what we say? All right. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christ is in our midst. You just made my life right there. So I wanted to ask you a question, which is, why would we hear this gospel reading today, all these names? As a priest, it's one of the most difficult gospel readings to get through, and even if we didn't say it right, you probably wouldn't know that we mispronounced half the names anyways. But the reason for this gospel reading is to show the lineage of Christ, to show that he came from a line that was kingly and that he came from a line that was priestly. So those two areas, the two lines that were in history, that if you were from one family, you were a kingly family. If you were another family, you were a priestly family. He came from both of those lines. But that's not the point I wanted to make about today's gospel reading. What I wanted to bring to your attention was the part that we hear where Joseph, finding that the Virgin Mary was with child, resolved to divorce her quietly. Why? And I think there's an important semblance of time that we have to understand in this gospel reading, otherwise it gets confusing. Because many people think Joseph marries the Virgin Mary, then he finds out she's pregnant, or she's pregnant before, or whatever. The order in which we understand it gets confusing for us, and we say, well, wouldn't he have known? Wasn't he told? And there's an important thing to understand here, is the history of the Virgin Mary and the timeline. Now, the timeline is some place that we read about in our Bible study last week in the Protoevangelion of James. And it speaks about the Virgin Mary coming of age. She was brought into the temple. So for those who may not know, the Virgin Mary lived in the temple from the years of 2, when she was 2 years old, to 12 years old. And she was at the point in the temple where she had to leave. They wouldn't allow adult women to stay in the temple as she was dedicated. So she was at the point of growing, maturing, and they said that she had to be taken out of the temple in order not to have that temple and that holiness and that purity and that simplicity of virginity to be in the temple, so she was to be taken out of the temple. But she was not to be put in the commonplace of the world, but to continue this life of chastity, of holiness, of godliness, of dedication to God. So what did they do? They called in widowers, older men who already had families, who were significantly older, and their wives had passed away, and they said, one of you is going to take care of the Virgin Mary. And by this miracle of the dove and the staff that comes, the dove comes out of the staff, we see that Joseph is the one who's chosen. But Joseph was also a carpenter. He was a builder. He was a builder of homes. And he leaves to go away. After he takes the Virgin Mary, he says, okay, I'm going to go away and I'm going to start working on homes. I'll come back. And then we hear the story of the Virgin Mary that we hear on her birthday, and we also hear it in other points in the year, where the Virgin Mary goes to Elizabeth, right, the mother of St. John. And she goes, and Elizabeth is pregnant with St. John, and the Virgin Mary comes, and St. John jumps in her womb. And we hear that story of the Virgin Mary's greeting to Elizabeth made St. John jump in her womb. But then it says she remained with her for about 3 months and then returned to her home. Why did she stay with her 3 months? Well, the assumption is that Joseph takes the Virgin Mary out of the temple, takes care of her, and then says, I have to go do my work. The Virgin Mary then, when he's gone, is told, you will conceive and bear Christ. She is conceived by the Holy Spirit. She is pregnant with Christ, and Joseph is not around yet, so she goes to her kinswoman Elizabeth and stays there for 3 months. So she's pregnant, she's growing, she's starting to show. Joseph is out. He comes back and sees her pregnant and says, what did I do? I left, and now there's this shame of the pregnancy. I don't know how this happened, and I should have stayed here. And he's contemplating. He says, this can't be. This can't be of God. And he's there, and you see in the icons of the Nativity, you can't see it from here, but you see Joseph in the bottom corner of the Nativity icon, and he's got his hand on his head, and he's wrestling with this message. And he says, I don't understand.